How do you determine the right level of treatment for PFAS? Too little and you risk PFAS getting through. Too much and you could blow up your budget. Dr. Charles Schaefer and his team are experts at designing PFAS treatability studies to address this problem head on. Check it out.
And I think it very initially starts with listening to the client, understanding what their need is for treatment, for regulations, where we do a lot of work here and, have a lot of maybe exciting and interesting tools, but it's not about trying to show off our tools and technology. It's really trying to meet what the client needs. And in that case, sometimes the maybe technically unexciting or simple solution is the best answer, or maybe it is one of these more exciting approaches. So it really starts with understanding what the client needs then. And I think very, very closely to that, in order to answer that question, is we have to have a good understanding of the technologies, whether it's some of the fundamental mechanisms of PFAS transport or phase behavior. Maybe it's understanding some of the various treatment technologies. For example, if we're looking at absorption technology for PFAS removal from any sort of water matrix, understanding, hey, what's out there in terms of sorbents, GAC or resin, or some of these novel sorbents, as what they're called. So it's really understanding that, and then working with the client, maybe other technical people in the project to put together the right set of conditions in the laboratory that are going to answer the right breadth of questions, so that ultimately we can arrive at the right technical and also economic solution for the client, again, to get to that next phase.
I know one of the main tools in your arsenal is these rapid small-scale column tests. Can you talk a little bit about what those are and why they're valuable?
Sure. So I guess I'll start with a little bit of history on that. These rapid small-scale column tests have been around for decades, and they're basically a way of kind of grinding the sorbent particles down, and traditionally that's been granular activated carbon, or GAC, and allows you to basically pass the water volume through the media with something that might take at a normal scale a year or two. And now we can run it through at a much higher flow rate because you get better mass transfer with the smaller particles, and allows you to basically condense that time frame maybe down to a couple of weeks. So we don't need as much water, we don't need as much time, and those are things that make it very attractive both to us and to the client. So what we have, I think taking somewhat of a leadership role in the industry is basically demonstrating that these types of tests can be applied for PFAS, at least in groundwater and drinking water type systems. Not only have we looked at granular activated carbon, we've looked at ion exchange resins and some novel sorbents. So we've kind of armed ourselves with the tools that we can, with the kind of pass the laugh test to our clients and say, hey, we've validated this for PFAS. We know this is giving us an approximate solution in a condensed time frame. So we know that this then can be used for kind of making a decision about what to maybe evaluate at the pilot scale or the full scale. The other really nice thing about these rapid small scale column tests is it allows us to test multiple sorbents, multiple conditions, the extent of pre-treatment that you do sometime, things like removing iron or TOC or other elements in the water. Allows us to do that under very controlled conditions in the laboratory and have this side-by-side test. So that allows us, when we do go to a pilot test or a full-scale test, to really have evaluated a lot of conditions. And because in PFAS world, there's still a lot of uncertainty as to how these different matrix effects and how these other things in the water can impact treatment. So it lets us really evaluate things with a lot more certainty with respect to these kind of secondary impacts, and go to a pilot phase with a lot more confidence.
PFAS research is constantly evolving. Subscribe to the Breaking Down PFAS newsletter to receive breaking news and dispatches from the front lines of R&D projects and the latest developments in the field. Learn more at cdmsmith.com/PFAS. When it comes to PFAS treatability for drinking water treatment, it's not just about removing the PFAS, right? Because the drinking water utility may be looking at a variety of different treatment challenges. So how do you assess PFAS treatability in the broader context of a given treatment challenge?
So when we do these treatability studies, we're looking at the impacts of treatment really more holistically. And what do I mean by that? Well, for some of the granular activated carbons, it's well known, and we've certainly showed in our studies that there can be some transient release of arsenic, right? And that's obviously can be huge when it comes to that. It's that showing up in drinking water. So what we like to do for all of our studies, but again, particularly for our drinking water clients, is really make sure, or at least assess the extent to which some secondary water quality impacts are occurring or not occurring when we do these studies. And again, that can be very important for our client. Sometimes it means they just need to make sure they pre-rinse and handle some things appropriately in the field. So, we don't look at PFAS in a vacuum. Again, we have to look at the kind of the world of what's happening here and what other impacts to water or whatever matrix we're treating might be occurring. And sometimes we're surprised by what we find at the bench scale. We've had some media just kind of fail miserably, and sometimes we don't know why. To which we've come back to the client and say, "Wow, aren't we glad we learned that here?" Pennies on the dollar of even looking at it at the pilot scale. So the type of rapid information you can get from that, almost without fail, we can point to where that's kind of saved time and money.
Well, the research continues to evolve. The EPA's MCLs are right around the corner, and of course, public awareness of PFAS continues to rise. So I anticipate just more and more interesting research, more findings, more breakthroughs in this realm. Is always fascinating to talk to you and hear more about what's going on there. So thank you so much for being here today.
It was my pleasure. Thank you for taking the time to chat about this.